Melbourne, March 2009. The season-opening Australian Grand Prix ends under a safety car. Trulli is third and Hamilton is fourth. Then, a penalty changes everything. Trulli is out and Hamilton's promoted. For a moment, it looks like a clean start to the year for McLaren. However, that result will be erased within a week, and Lewis Hamilton's name will be at the center of a lie. This is the story of Spygate, when a podium finish became a scandal and a young champion was left with no other choice but to choose between his team and the truth. Well, the final laps of the 2009 Melbourne GP were not transparent. With just a few laps to go, Robert Kubica and Sebastian Vettel collided while fighting for position. The crash brought out the safety car and froze the race order. Jarno Trulli was running third for Toyota, and Lewis Hamilton in the McLaren was fourth. Suddenly, behind the safety car, Trulli ran wide off track. Hamilton passed him, and a few corners later, he slowed down and let Trulli back through. That should have been it. The kind of moment gets discussed in the debrief, not in a courtroom. Drivers give back positions under yellow flags all the time. McLaren had told Hamilton to move aside, and he had done what he was told. However, after the race, the stewards penalized Trulli. They believed he had overtaken illegally during the caution period. The penalty dropped him to 12th. Hamilton instead was bumped up to 3rd. It looked genuine and simple on paper, but in actuality, it was not. What McLaren had said, and what they had chosen not to say, was about to cause way more damage than anyone expected. That's because the team hadn't only left out context, but also the truth. After the race, Lewis Hamilton and McLaren's sporting director, Dave Ryan, were called in by the FIA. There, they were asked a direct question. Did Hamilton allow Jarno Trulli to repass voluntarily, or had Trulli overtaken him illegally? McLaren's answer was pretty much predetermined. They said Hamilton had not been instructed to let Trulli by and hadn't slowed intentionally. He was confused under the safety car and Trulli had taken advantage. That wasn't true, and McLaren knew it. Later, the radio messages made everything as clear as it could possibly be. What McLaren chose to do at that moment could never have been considered a mistake in communication. It was a deliberate decision to conceal information that would have reversed the penalty. They told the story a certain way and withheld the radio data entirely. There was no submission of team audio, nor was any sort of admission that instructions had been given. In fact, even after being asked multiple times, no instances of clarification came from McLaren. Hamilton got stuck into the trap. He told the FIA people what the team had asked him to say. He didn't object or push back. At that point in his career, he was in his 3rd season. The Briton was driving for the only team he had ever known, a team that had managed his development since his childhood. So he followed their lead, and the lie held, but not for long. By the time the paddock arrived in Malaysia for the 2nd round of the season, the FIA had already listened to the radio tapes. They recalled Hamilton for a second hearing, and this time with evidence in hand. So, there wasn't much to argue.
Overtaking.
The Toyota went off in the second to last corner. I overtook him. Is that okay?
Understood, Lewis. We'll confirm and get back to you.
He was off the track. He went wide.
Lewis, you need to allow the Toyota through. Allow the Toyota through now.
Okay. Slowed right down in front of me.
Okay, Lewis, stay ahead for the time being. Stay ahead. We'll get back to you. We're talking to Charlie.
I've let him pass already.
Okay, Lewis, that's fine. That's fine. Hold position. Hold position.
The audio made the sequence of events clear. McLaren had told Hamilton to let Trulli by, and they intentionally chose not to disclose it in the post-race inquiry. Not only that, the team had advised Hamilton to leave that part out when speaking to the FIA investigators. However, faced with the facts, Hamilton had to admit it, and he did that quietly. He told them he had followed the team's instructions during the race and in the room. The FIA didn't take long to respond. Hamilton was immediately disqualified from the Australian Grand Prix, and McLaren's podium place was snatched away. On the other hand, Trulli was reinstated, and with all these, the illusionary moment of celebration from round 1 was erased. McLaren suspended Dave Ryan the same day. He left the circuit and never returned to a race in a McLaren team role again. Internally, the team acknowledged fault, but publicly, they made a brief statement and described the incident as a serious error of judgment. The weight of the fallout wasn't just felt in the documents, though. It was written across Hamilton's face. At the press conference in Sepang, he stood in front of a packed room and said, "I was instructed to withhold information. I'm not a liar, but I was in a position where I was told what to do, and I did it. I'm sorry." There was an attempt to blame anyone else. A 24-year-old driver was carrying a decision that wasn't entirely his, but the consequences very much were. The reason Spygate hit as hard as it did wasn't just because of what happened in Melbourne. It was because of what had already happened in 2007. 2 years ago, McLaren had been found guilty of holding confidential Ferrari technical documents. The case, Spygate, ended with the team being fined $100 million and excluded from that year's Constructors' Championship. That was not a headline, but a crisis. The fallout was global, and the label stuck. By the time the 2009 season began, many eyes were on McLaren, and everyone inside the paddock knew it. So when the world came to know about Spygate, and it became clear that the team had misled the FIA again, even if the scale was smaller, it looked like a repeat offense. The FIA didn't need to make an example of them. The damage was already reputational. However, Spygate made it harder to argue that anything had changed. Internally, it was another trust breach, but externally, it became pretty challenging for rivals, race officials, and even fans to separate one incident from the other. The timing, the people, and the pattern looked way too familiar, and that's where the actual problem lay. Lewis Hamilton didn't design the lie. He didn't plan the deception, but he delivered it, and that's what stayed with him. He was still early in his career then, and he found himself caught in a situation perhaps many drivers have quietly faced. In F1, unapologetically, the team comes first. Notably, this obligation hardly comes through a threat. Exceptional loyalty, trust, and expectation fuel it most of the time. McLaren had been Hamilton's home since he was 13. Naturally, he never saw them as just a race team. They were the people who had made his way to Formula One. Therefore, in that moment, saying what they asked didn't feel like a betrayal of the truth. It was simply a part of the job. However, when it fell apart publicly and Hamilton stood in Malaysia admitting what happened, something changed. That was the moment Hamilton stopped being the company driver. From there on, he was more self-directed and less willing to let someone else speak for him. Though Hamilton didn't walk away from McLaren immediately, for obvious reasons, the relationship was never the same. Spygate hardened him, and that made all the difference in who he later became. If you followed this far, you already know Formula One is way more than sheer laps, flags, and adrenaline rush. Stick around and subscribe. See you soon in the next.